In 2006, a carpentry supervisor named Gerard Vaccaro was doing what he had done dozens of times before. He was moving through the interior foundations of the Brooklyn Bridge on a routine structural inspection, checking for cracks, moisture damage, anything that needed attention. The bridge had been standing since 1883. There were not supposed to be any surprises left inside it. Then he opened a door, stepped into a room, and stopped. Stacked in the dim space around him were cardboard boxes, metal drums, and paper blankets folded into bricks. Supplies. Decades of dust on everything. Nobody had sent him there. Nobody had told him it was there. "I've never found anything as significant as this," Vaccaro said later. To understand what he was looking at, you have to go back to a specific moment in American life, the late 1950s, when fear was not abstract. It was something people carried with them. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, a small metal sphere that beeped its way around the Earth in 98 minutes. To most Americans, the message was simple. If they can put something in orbit, they can put a bomb anywhere they want. The following years were defined by that calculation. Air raid drills in schools. Civil defense pamphlets were mailed to households. Diagrams of how to position your body under a desk, as if a desk could stop a hydrogen bomb. Then came October 1962. For 13 days during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States and the Soviet Union stood at the edge. President Kennedy addressed the nation on television. Soviet ships carrying missiles turned toward Cuba. People bought canned food and filled bathtubs with water. Some genuinely believed the world would end before the month was out. The federal government had been preparing for exactly that possibility since the early 1950s. The Office of Civil Defense, a unit of the Pentagon, had a straightforward mandate. If a nuclear weapon hit an American city, some people needed to survive it. The program they designed was vast. Across the country, in churches, office basements, highway tunnels, and public buildings, they began stockpiling survival supplies. New York City alone had identified over 17,000 structures capable of sheltering more than 11 million people. The supplies were standardized: water, food with long shelf lives, blankets, and basic medicine. Everything a group of people would need to wait out the fallout. The Brooklyn Bridge, it turned out, was one of those places. The bridge had been holding secrets for a long time before the Cold War came along. When engineer John A. Roebling first designed the Brooklyn Bridge in the 1860s, he envisioned more than a road across a river. The massive stone anchorages on both ends of the bridge, the structures that hold the cables in place and bear the pull of the entire span, were designed with interior chambers. On the Brooklyn side, Roebling drew up plans for 8 cathedral-like rooms with ceilings nearly 50 feet high, imagining them eventually as a retail arcade. That vision never materialized. What happened instead was more layered and more interesting. As construction began in the 1870s, there was a practical problem. 2 businesses sat in the path of the bridge's approach on the Manhattan side: Lloydy's and Company, a liquor distributor, and on the Brooklyn shore, Rackey's Wine Company. Their storage facilities would have to be demolished. Washington Roebling, who had taken over as chief engineer after his father, John, died of tetanus in 1869, saw an opportunity. The vaults beneath the bridge approaches were cool, dark, and consistent in temperature. They were perfect for wine. The wine cellars opened in 1876, 7 years before the bridge itself did. Over the following 4 decades, multiple vendors rented the spaces. On the Manhattan side, a vault operated by Anthony Oakes became known as the Blue Grotto, its walls painted with frescoes depicting vineyards in Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. A visitor in 1978 found an inscription still faintly visible on the crumbling wall: "Who loveth not wine, women and song, he remaineth a fool his whole life long." The wine era ended after World War II, when the city took over management of the chambers. The spaces became municipal storage, then briefly an art venue, then largely forgotten. The Brooklyn side was opened to the public for nearly 2 decades through the arts organization Creative Time, which mounted annual installations in the cathedral-like chambers, from 1983 until 2001. When the towers fell in September of that year, the city sealed everything, and the public was locked out permanently. But some rooms had been sealed far longer than that. At some point during the late 1950s or early 1960s, someone entered one of the chambers in the Manhattan anchorage and began filling it. The exact date is unknown. The exact person or agency is unknown. What they left behind tells most of the story. The supplies stamped with the year 1957 came in during the Sputnik period. More arrived in 1962, the year of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Boxes labeled Civil Defense All-Purpose Survival Crackers were sealed in watertight metal canisters. There were 140 boxes in total, holding an estimated 352,000 crackers, enough calories to sustain a large group of people for weeks. Alongside the food, 50 metal drums intended for water storage, paper blankets folded tightly into bricks, basic first aid equipment, and stockpiles of a drug called dextran, used to prevent and treat shock. Some of the boxes carried a simpler label, for use only after enemy attack. There was also, oddly, a collection of promotional posters for New York City. Glossy, optimistic images of the skyline and the parks, the kind of thing you might have seen in a tourism office in 1962. Whether they were meant as decoration, morale material, or someone's afterthought, nobody knows. Transportation Commissioner Iris Weinschall, who spoke publicly about the discovery, called it a treasure of modern history. Bridge Repair Director George Klein noted that workers had passed through those rooms before without registering what the boxes contained. Our people have been in here before, he said, but I don't think anyone realized the significance of the boxes. The Office of Civil Defense, which became the precursor to what is now FEMA, likely placed the supplies. But exactly who decided to use the Brooklyn Bridge specifically, and whether it was intended as a shelter for survivors, or simply as storage, remains unclear. Weinschall told reporters in March 2006 that the DOT was still trying to trace the origin. Until we get to the bottom of when it was put here, who put it here, we won't know fully, she said. What makes this discovery strange is not just what was found, but how long it sat there without anyone noticing. The Cold War ended in 1991. The Soviet Union dissolved. The Office of Civil Defense had long since been absorbed and reorganized. The fallout shelter program that once involved 17,000 designated buildings across New York City had quietly collapsed. By 1979, the city was selling off its shelter supplies by the ton to a contractor named Jack Jordan, who paid $1.06 per ton for the lot. The crackers, the drums, the blankets, the aspirin, the hard candies meant to suppress appetite. Much of it was auctioned off or discarded. But someone forgot about this room. For roughly 45 years, a fully stocked nuclear bunker sat inside one of the most famous structures in the world, in one of the most densely populated cities on the planet, and no one thought to look. The crackers were, by most accounts, likely still edible. The blankets were intact. The water drums were empty, but sealed. Everything waited for a catastrophe that never came. When the 2006 Annual Condition Report for New York's bridges and tunnels was published, it included photographs of what Vaccaro and his crew had found. The stacked boxes, the drums, the folded blankets, the grim instruction labels. The images looked like a prop room from a film set in a fear that most people had spent decades trying to forget. The New York Times broke the story on March the 21st, 2006. Within days, it had circled the world. The room is still there. The city has not disclosed its precise location within the Manhattan anchorage, citing security concerns. The DOT acknowledges it exists. The anchorages on both sides of the bridge remain closed to the public, sealed since September 2001, and showing no signs of reopening. More than 150,000 people cross the Brooklyn Bridge on an average day, on foot, by bicycle, by car, with coffee in hand and headphones in, with no idea that somewhere beneath their feet, behind a wall in a stone vault older than most countries alive today, there is a room that was once stocked with enough crackers to feed thousands of survivors of a nuclear war. The crackers are still in there, as far as anyone knows publicly. The blankets, the dextrin, the NYC promotional posters have images of a skyline that has since been altered permanently. What the discovery captures is not really about the bridge. It is about a particular kind of anxiety that shaped American life for nearly half a century. An anxiety so practical and so pervasive that the government responded to it by hiding food inside bridges. The Cold War produced a very specific architecture: reinforced basements, yellow and black fallout shelter signs, designated rooms beneath grocery stores, churches, and high schools. Most of those spaces have been renovated, repurposed, or forgotten. The signs are still bolted to buildings around New York City, faded and ignored. The Brooklyn Bridge bunker is one of the few places where the full weight of that period is still physically intact. Nothing was thrown out, nothing was renovated. The fear was simply sealed in a room and left there. And then the people who sealed it moved on. And then the people who feared the thing they were preparing for moved on too. And then an entire generation grew up without knowing any of it was there at all. Vaccaro stood in that room in 2006 and said he had never found anything as significant. He was not wrong. What he had found was not just a cache of supplies. It was the physical record of a time when the people who built America's cities genuinely believed they might have to hide inside them.